G'day everyone. Today we're going to be changing out the front fork seals on this CRF450. Now it's pretty much the same procedure for every motorbike, and we're going to be changing out the dust seal on the bottom here and changing out the oil seal as well. We're going to do it with as basic tools as possible. Now there's a couple of things that will make your life a little bit easier. I have a seal installer here, but we'll do it also without the seal installer to see which way is better, using electrical tape or a seal installer. Of course, we can't get away without buying new seals. We've got dust seals and inner seals. Make sure you get both. And of course, I've got some fork oil here because we're going to need to fill it up with fork oil when we're done. It's also good to have a bucket and a vise, a bucket for collecting all the old oil and a vise for holding it all steady while we pull it apart. And we have a 50mm nut on the top here, so make sure you have a spanner that can undo at least 50mm. Other than that, let's pull it apart. Okay, first up, we'll take these guards and the caliper off so we can get the fork legs out. Okay, to get these guards off, we do need to take the wheel out first. So we'll loosen these two pinch bolts here. Crack them off. Then we can undo the main axle nut. Main axle nuts are 22 and these pinch bolts are a 10. Once we've got that nut off, we'll go ahead and loosen these two pinch bolts, and we should be able to slide that axle out and remove the front wheel. Now, if we just put that back on a little bit loose, axle should be loose like that. Okay, with that all loose and the axle shaft out, we should just be able to roll the front wheel away from the caliper there. There we go. Obviously, make sure that there's a lot of weight on the back of the bike. The last thing you want is the wheel to roll out and the front of the bike to drop. We want all the weight as far back as possible. And we have the front wheel. Keep the spaces with the front wheel, and there's a good chance to check your bearings and make sure the wheel bearings are good. Last time I had this wheel off, I actually needed to do the wheel bearings. So good chance to check on those while we're here. Okay, with that wheel off, we should be able to just access these two screw heads here. Take off the fork guards, and we'll get that caliper off as well. Now the caliper also sits on 10mm head bolts, so we'll take them off. Okay, from here we've got these 4 pinch bolts, same size again, 10mm heads. Just going to crack all them off. Okay, that's pretty loose. All right, the fork's loose. It should be able to just, there we go. So that is the front fork out. We'll put that in a vise and we can pull it apart. Okay, I've just clamped it in the vise here and I've padded it up as much as possible. If you've got aluminium soft jaws or something like that, it's not too tight. We don't want to crush the tube, we just want to look after it. I've cleaned it up as much as possible, and now we're just going to remove this outer dust seal. Now we just use a little screwdriver and we very carefully pry the seal away so we get it out away from the tube. All right, we slide that out of the way. Now inside here is a little retaining clip. We just want to get to that retaining clip and remove it, and that's as far as we go for now. Now just be very careful not to scratch any of the chrome. We just want to push the clip out. Nothing more, nothing less. Just pop that little clip out of here. There it is. Just slide it out of the way. Okay, we're going to use our 50mm spanner, and we're just going to undo this here. It's not exactly the correct tool, but works just fine. I have a bucket at the ready because there is oil going to come out of here, and I've angled it as such so we can capture all of that oil as it comes out. And out it all comes. Let that drain for a little bit. Okay, I've just turned it around in the vise. We've clamped it on this end here. We're just going to undo this nuts on the end. It's a 21. Okay, that's fully unthreaded now. We just need to go to the other side and we need to push this out of this part here. So what we're going to do is put the cap back on the other end and we'll push it all forward. Okay, so I've just put the damper back on with a few threads and I've put a ratchet strap on here. We don't want it to touch the chrome. And we're just going to take a little bit of tension up. And at the back here, this bolt should come out. Now, if it doesn't, like in my case, there may be a little bit of vacuum. We can see if we grab it here and it's unthreaded, we can actually still remove it. We can only remove it as far as this is going to allow us. So if we hold on to that, we'll have to go a little bit further. Scarily. And we'll have to undo these two halves here. Okay, just remember we've got tension on that ratchet strap, so just stay out of the line of fire. Now this will be still potentially recessed inside your fork leg. You may need to pull it out. You can see here it wants to return. Now this is a 17mm spanner here, and we've got the same 21 on the nut. We're going to separate these two parts here. They may be quite tight. It's not too bad. Just going to undo that. We're doing everything by hand here. We don't use any power tools because everything's a little bit delicate. Okay, that's our little adjuster, and inside here we have a rod as well. We don't have to eject the rod just yet. We can tip that out later. Now, with that nut off, we can separate the two halves of the suspension. Okay, I'm just going to very carefully take the tension off this ratchet strap. We're going to push forward as much as we can and take the tension off like that. And we no longer need this, so let's get it out of here. Okay, with that now all as it is, we're going to turn this around and we're going to put it back in the vise with the cylinder barrel in the vise, and we're going to pull the fork leg out. Okay, with that repositioned in the vise like so, we can unscrew this, maybe some more residual oil, and we can extract all of the damper assembly. There it is, and there's that rod we could have got out earlier, but we couldn't. Move that carefully and look after it. And that is our damper assembly. And inside the tube, there also should be a spring, which we may need to tip out into our bucket. Okay, I've taken the spring out of the barrel. That's the spring there. It's quite the spring. The seal's still sitting in the barrel here. We're going to use the fork leg like a slide hammer to slide against this seal, and we're going to slide hammer the seal out. I've already done a couple, so it should be most of the way out. It might be a little bit tough, 2 or 3, and it should come out. That was already out. Look at that, how good. On the end of here, obviously we have the seal that we're going to change. We have 2 bushes. Now we need to make sure that the anti-friction facing on these are okay, or else we need to change them. For the most part, the bushes, 99% of the time they're okay, but we'll take them off. There is a split in each of those, and we'll just double check there's no contamination in them and they're not damaged in any way, and they can actually go back on, and then we can change out these 2 seals and clean everything and put it all back together. Okay, now we have all the components out. It's time to clean them all up. We're going to remove these 2 old seals. Remember which way around they go when we take them off. We've got a ring there that comes off, and these 2 bushings to come off as well. We'll clean everything up, and we'll put the fork tube back together. Then we'll strip the damper, and we'll fill it with oil when we put it all back together. Okay, so we've got the fork tube here, and we have this upper bush. Now the outside face of this bush is very important. It needs to make sure there's no scratches or nicks. That is your anti-friction coating. Just going to use a little screwdriver here just to open it up enough, just to slide it off the end there of the fork tube. There it is. Now we have the lower bush. Now this one, it's important that the inside diameter is in very good condition. You need to make sure there's no bits of contamination, any scores on that anti-friction coating. Then we have this ring here. That ring will go again as well. Just be careful on the fork tube as we slide it up. Nothing wrong with that ring. That will definitely go again. Now we have the oil seal. This is the inner seal or the upper seal. Just make a note of which way it's coming off. In this case here, we have the smaller diameter of the seal is facing down to the ground, and we have the cut at the top here facing up. So it's going to come off like that. We don't need to be careful with this one because it's not going again. And that is the outside there. That's going to face up and that's going to face down. There is a groove in both sides, but you can see it has a smaller diameter facing the ground. Then we have our ring, which holds that in place. We'll just not scratch the chrome, take that ring off. And then lastly, we have the dust seal. That has the spring facing down to the ground. It has this lip here to make sure it doesn't disappear into the fork tube itself. So with all that off there, we're going to thoroughly clean this chrome area here. Make sure it's very clean and tidy. We'll clean inside it as well. And we're just going to make sure that there's no nicks, scratches, burrs, any high spots, any like scores where we're going to see oil flow through, and we're going to clean it up with a little bit of Scotch-Brite and make sure it is as shiny and clean as it possibly can be before fitting all the new seals and refitting the bushings. Okay, I've got some old Scotch-Brite here. It's pretty well worn down, which is kind of how I want it. We don't want to be doing any vertical work because then we're going to make scratches that oil can pass through. We're not going to go around this way either because then we create a radial scratch where the oil can also travel around. Little circles, if you find any spots you want to deal with, just little tiny circles, and just polish it up nice and tidy. And we'll just make sure there's no vertical lines where oil can pass through, anything like that. We're just going to tidy up this chrome with a little bit of oil still on it. I'm just leaving the oil on for now. And we're just going to make sure that there is nothing that's going to ruin the new seals, because then it's pointless doing this job if we're just going to allow oil to bypass our new seals as well. Okay, so that rod is as clean as I can get it. I've cleaned the inside out as well. There is a little ring in the bottom, just make sure you don't lose that. Any burrs, I've just gone around nice little circles with our Scotch-Brite. Now, I've got a bit of plastic here. We could probably even use the plastic that the new seals come in. The plastic is going to protect the seals when we fit them against the very sharp edge of the end of the rod here. So I'm going to get this plastic. It's very soft plastic that I've just cut to size. And we're just going to slide it over the end of the tube, much like this. And that is going to protect our seals when we put them on against that sharp edge. So we've got the two brand new seals. Now, obviously, we've got to put them in the right order. We want the dust seal first, then we want the retaining ring, then we want the oil seal. And we're going to lubricate everything that we put on with a little bit of the fork oil that we're going to use when we build the fork. So we get a little bit of that, and we just lube the inside of the seal. We can lube up our bit of plastic too. It's probably a good idea. Make sure everything is slippery as it possibly can be. And then with the spring side down and with the flange facing down as well, we're going to fit the dust seal first. The plastic makes it a little bit harder to fit, but it also protects it on the way down. Just got to go with that landing there as well. And we just slide it all the way down out of the way. Next, we have our reusable clip. That goes again, that clip. So we're just going to fit that clip. That's no big deal. We just slide that over. Next, we have the oil seal. Now this one, we're going to lube up the same with a little bit of fork oil just inside here. Put a little bit more on our plastic as well. Now when we fit that, we have the little small lip here, the smaller diameter. It's going to face down to the ground and the inner ridge is facing up. So it looks a little bit like that. We can just see the spring on the bottom one, and we have the smaller diameter facing down. Once again, we're going to very carefully slide it over the plastic. We really don't want to damage it at this point. Carefully over all them ridges. And we slide it all the way down to about there. That's good enough. Now we've got both our seals and our retainer clip on there. We have the backing ring. Make sure that's nice and clean. We'll just carefully slide that over as well. We don't really need the plastic for this one, but it's already there. And we carefully don't scratch the chrome and just park that behind the oil seal. Now that is fully assembled, ready to go in terms of the seals. We remove the plastic and we have the two bushings. We have the lower bushing and we have the upper one as well. Same thing, we're going to just lube it up a little bit with some fork oil on the inside here. And we're just going to open it up and very carefully slide it over the tube. And we'll just park it down here. And then we have the upper one, which is the larger of the two. A little bit of oil, both diameters. And we're just going to park that in its groove. Make sure that lands in the groove nicely. It should clip in like that. Just give it a bit of a turn, make sure it's all happy. There's no debris or anything behind it. And we just put a little bit of fork oil around there. That's fully assembled, ready to go. We'll jump on to stripping the damper next. Okay, so the damper assembly is just sitting in the vise there. It's not too tight, it's just sitting on the upper lip, and we're going to use this 32mm socket I've got here. That sits over the top nicely there. It's all very heavy duty, but it's what we've got. And I'm going to have to put the 50 around the outside like this. We're just going to separate the two. There we go. Nice and gently, even though we're using some pretty heavy duty stuff. We'll just separate these two out. Taking these little bleed valves out here will help us remove this section here. There's no vacuum that way. Let's do a little bit of vacuum. Slowly pull the assembly out. Keep it clean and tidy. Just inspect it, and we'll get either new O-rings or very carefully reuse these O-rings if they look good. So we'll get that assembly and we'll just put it aside. Now we're going to drain all the oil out of this damper assembly here. We want to drain everything we can out of it. Move the damper rod up and down. We want to try and get any oil and any air out of it. Bring that bucket up and we'll drain it out. Okay, we're just going to drain any oil out of there. We'll move this damper rod up and down, and you can see we're going to get more oil out when we move this in and out. We want to let it drain for as long as possible. We want to get every little bit of oil out of it as we possibly can. Okay, now that's all clean and totally drained of oil. We've moved the damper rod up and down. We've removed any oil that could possibly be in there. We're going to fill it back up with clean fork oil, and there is a lip down here on the lower part of this tube, and we're going to fill it to 1.875 inches above that lip, which is 47mm. So we'll fill it up, and I'm going to use this ruler as a bit of a dipstick all the way up to 47mm. We make sure we check it and the level's right. We'll move the damper rod up and down and remove any air that's in there, and then we'll measure it again, make sure there's no air. The measurement's good, we're 47mm above that upper lip. Then we'll go ahead and we'll put the rest of the assembly back in the top. Okay, now I've pumped the damper rod a bit. The level has dropped, so we'll just put a bit more in. We're sitting, oh, that's bang on 47 by the look of things. That's pretty good, so that's the level we want. I'll pump the damper rod again and make sure there's no air. If we continue to get air, we continue to fill it up. Keep it at that 47mm level. Pump the rod each time. Make sure you cover it so oil doesn't go everywhere as you pump it down. Once the level remains the same, we can put the rest of the assembly back in the top. Okay, I'm happy the level's correct. It stayed at 47. I've pumped it up and down quite a bit, and that level has not changed. I'm going to put this damper assembly back in. New O-rings if you've got them. I've lubed up the old ones here, and I'm going to reuse them. I think they'll be okay. So make sure it's very clean. We don't want any contamination in there whatsoever. We'll just slowly push this down. We'll get that thread started in there, and we'll torque it up. Okay, now we've got that started. It should wind in fairly easily with this 19mm spanner. Once we get it tight, we'll actually torque it up as well. We'll make sure that these are torqued properly. Okay, that's wound all the way down. It's just hand tight at the moment. Now the spec is 22 foot-pounds for this one, so I'm just going to put my massive spanner on it again. And we're just going to nice and carefully bring it up to 22 foot-pounds. We're already there. So I'll go down with the spanner. All right, well, I'm happy that's tight. Very good. Just going to go ahead and we'll put this relief back in place. A little spanner here for it, 8mm. Nip that up. Very good. Okay, now we're ready to put everything back together. We can put all the leg, the tube, and the spring all back as one. Now with that damper all together, we're going to take it out of the vise and just slowly work this damper rod up and down. It should return just like that, about 4 or 5 inches, not too much. We're just allowing a little bit of air and oil to move through all the valves. Just give it a little bit of a push and let it slowly return. It should be quite smooth and very linear like it is here. Just going to work it in and out a few times and just work all that oil and air through the valves and make sure everything's working the way it should. Once we've done that, we're going to compress it all the way up. So what I want to do here, we're going to soften this right up. We're going to turn this screw all the way counterclockwise to its softest position. It makes it easy for us to completely compress that rod. That we're going to compress the entire rod all the way up a couple of times just to get the oil level right in that damper. So soften it right up, and we put it on a rag on the bench here. We're just going to slowly push it down. It should fight against us pretty hard, but we should be able to easily push it all the way down with a bit of muscle, and we're going to let it return, and we'll do it once more. Push it all the way down, let all that oil work its way through the damping system, and let it return. And then the two holes at the top, if we have the level about right, a little bit of oil should drain out, and that is setting our level perfectly. So a little bit of oil in there, that means we're just a little bit above the level, but we were pretty close. Then we can blow them holes out with a bit of compressed air. Now, when we put the leg into the main tube here, we're going to just put oil all over it, all over the two bushings. Make sure everything's all oiled up with the fork oil. And we're just going to slowly slide it into the main tube there. And we're then going to go ahead and push these seals into position and the retaining ring as well. Now, I've got a special tool for this. We can do it with electrical tape. If you want, you just wind electrical tape around the leg and then use the leg to drive the seal in with the electrical tape. I've got the proper seal installer here. It was actually quite cheap. It was about $30. And we can just use it to slowly drive the seal in a couple of times up and down. You keep going until the seal is all the way home against that washer. Like I said, you can use electrical tape. If you wind enough electrical tape around the leg to make sure there's no oil there so the electrical tape doesn't slide, you can use the leg to drive the seal in. Once that seal's all the way home, you'll know because you should be able to fit the circlip quite easily. The dust seal isn't quite as tight. You should be able to pretty much push it in by hand. I used the seal installer again, just gave it a couple of taps. It went home very easily. Okay, now for the method without using the tool. If you've got a roll of electrical tape, much like this, you're probably going to use a whole roll to do two forks. You want to roll on nice and thick with a nice straight edge on it. Probably do a better job than I've done here. We'll cut off that excess, and then we're going to use the electrical tape on the rod to drive the seal into the barrel. We just do it like this, like a slide hammer, give it 2 or 3 strikes, and then just check to see if the circlip will actually go into the groove. It doesn't take much to drive it in. The weight of the chrome rod is pretty good. It actually worked quite well, this method. If you don't want to buy the tool, you certainly don't have to. Just buy a roll of electrical tape and it'll work just fine. We flick the clip in there, and then we can remove the tape and clean off any residue left behind by the tape. And then we can go ahead and fit the dust seal. Now, fitting the dust seal is pretty easy. We can pretty much push that dust seal in by hand. You just sort of work it around, bit of force, and you can actually push it in without too many problems at all. If you can't, we can also use the sticky tape method, or we can just use the end of the rod like I've done here. A couple of whacks just to make sure it's all the way home. Now the spring here, we're just going to put it down the barrel on the other end, and we should be able to just push it in. Don't need to force it. It might come a little bit stuck. Just give it a wiggle and it should fall into place quite easily. And we're going to follow that up with the entire damping system that we just assembled. Now that should also go in quite easily. If it doesn't, you don't need to force it. Just give it a bit of a wiggle. Try and support the other end of it a bit, and it should slide in quite easily all the way to the thread. If it doesn't, bit of a wiggle. Just don't need to put any force on that at all. Once it's all the way home, we'll just wind the cap in by hand. We're not going to torque it at this point because we still need to fill up that chamber with oil. I'm just retracting the rod again here. We need to retract it enough so we can expose that thread and we can fit the damping push rod and the cap on the end as well. Okay, so we need to clean up this aluminium push rod and slide it in just like I've done here. Now, it isn't exactly round. It has a flat spot on it, and that flat spot is designed to link up with the flat spot in the end cap here. As you can see, they lock together, and we can slide the end cap down and start to thread it onto the end of the damper. Now, the best method here is to actually not turn the end cap that I'm currently turning. The best method is to actually turn the damper rod and hold the end cap stationary. That way, we're not turning the push rod inside the housing and potentially damaging it. I believe I got away with it this time and I've just turned the end cap, but it is best practice to hold that cap stationary and turn the rod with the 17mm spanner, not turn the end cap. Anyway, once we've got that all the way up, the torque of that 17mm spanner and the 21mm end cap is 16 foot-pounds. So we're just going to tighten them two together at 16 foot-pounds. Just make sure that they're tight and not going to go anywhere, much like this. We get them to 16 foot-pounds, and then we can drop the end cap back into the bottom of the fork leg, take the tension off, and we can tighten that cap up into the bottom of that fork leg. The torque for that cap is 51 foot-pounds, and you can see here I'm just putting the torque wrench on it now. We'll just torque it up. When I started, I did fully soften the end cap, so I'm just going to tighten it back up 12 clicks, which is for me halfway. There's 24 clicks in the entire cycle. I'm going back up 12. Now, we left this cap loose earlier for a reason. We're going to undo the cap again, put this back in the vise vertically. We're just going to lift it part way up, and we're going to fill this chamber here with fork oil. Now, Honda suggests 336 milliliters from what I can read in the book, but you can go all the way up to 400, and you can go all the way down to 300. Somewhere between 300 and 400. The higher the oil level, the stiffer the springs will feel. I've gone with the factory 336. If you spill a little, no big deal. Just clean it up so you don't think that your forks are leaking. We'll put it down and wind that down. Now, the torque for this end cap is 26 foot-pounds. We can either do it in the vise now, or we can do it when it's clamped into the bike. The bike is a good clamp for it. Just make sure you get it as tight as you sort of can, because if you turn the cap too much, it's going to look weird. It's not going to line up with the top of your triple clamp. So I've tightened up as much as I can, and I'll just torque check it on the bike. The lower triple clamps that I'm tightening up now, they are 15 foot-pounds. That's the spec. And the upper ones are 1 foot-pound higher. They're 16 foot-pounds for the upper triple clamp, and they are 15 for the lower. So we'll adjust the torque wrench up 1 foot-pound, and we'll tighten the top to that 16. Not sure why it's 1 foot-pound different, but that's how it is. Make sure everything lines up and it looks good. I've torque checked this, and I'm happy everything is how it should be. We'll refit the wheel and the caliper. Other than that, thank you very much for watching.